In the grim and unforgiving autumn of the year 613, beneath the gray, leaden skies of a world tearing itself apart, the plains near the village of Renève in what is now eastern France became the stage for a spectacle of cruelty that would stain the conscience of history forever. Here, amidst the mud and the biting cold of the turning season, an elderly woman draped in the tattered remnants of royal robes stood alone before a jeering, bloodthirsty army that stretched as far as the eye could see. She was not merely a prisoner of war, nor was she a common criminal caught in the gears of justice. She was Queen Brunhilda of Austrasia, a titan of the Merovingian age who was nearly 80 years old, a matriarch who had commanded kingdoms, checkmated bishops, and forged the destiny of Europe for nearly half a century. Now, however, she was bound, broken, and defenseless, forced to endure a 3-day ordeal of state-sanctioned torture that would culminate in one of the most horrifying and theatrically brutal executions ever inflicted upon European royalty. Her crime, according to the captors who mocked her with venomous glee, was the responsibility for the deaths of 10 Frankish kings, a monstrous accusation designed to strip her of her humanity. Yet, to the silent observer of history, her true transgression was simply wielding unapologetic power in a fractured world that stubbornly refused to forgive ambitious women. The path to this harrowing moment of judgment had been paved with blood and betrayal, beginning its final descent when King Chlothar II of Burgundy, her own grandson, died suddenly from dysentery at the age of 27 in that same chaotic year of 613. In a desperate bid to preserve her dynasty and maintain the stability she had fought for all her life, Brunhilda moved quickly to elevate his illegitimate son, the 11-year-old Sigebert II, to the throne, intending to rule as regent over both Austrasia and Burgundy. It was this decision, a final grasp of the reins of power, that sealed her fate. For Frankish nobility had endured her iron-fisted rule for too long and would tolerate no more. She had spent decades crushing dissent, executing dukes who opposed her vision of a centralized monarchy, and accumulating a legion of powerful enemies who lurked in the shadows, waiting for a moment of weakness. When she ordered the assassination of Bishop Desiderius of Vienne in 612, a holy man who had dared to criticize her, even the church, which had often been her ally, turned its back on her, leaving her spiritually and politically isolated. Chief among the wolves circling her crumbling throne was Chlothar II of Neustria, the son of Fredegund, the very woman Brunhilda held responsible for the brutal murder of her sister Galswintha and the assassination of her husband Sigebert nearly 4 decades earlier. This was not just a war for territory. It was the climax of a blood feud that had poisoned the soul of Francia for generations. The betrayal that finally undid her began within her own ranks, orchestrated by the nobles Warnakar and Rado, who secretly pledged their allegiance to Chlothar, conspiring to hand the queen regent over to her nemesis. The end arrived with shocking swiftness when Brunhilda marched her forces to the river Ain to meet Chlothar's invading army, fully expecting a battle that would decide the fate of the realm. Instead, as the armies faced one another across the water, the patrician Elitheus, along with Duke Rocco and Duke Sigvald, deserted her in plain sight, their banners lowering in a silent signal of treachery. Her army, seeing the defection of their commanders, refused to draw their swords, leaving the queen exposed and vulnerable. In a panic, she fled with the young King Sigebert and his brother Corbouz toward the mountains of Switzerland, hoping to reach the sanctuary of the Germanic tribes who might still honor her name. But Chlothar's soldiers were relentless, pursuing them with the ferocity of hunters chasing wounded prey, and they were finally overtaken and captured at Lake Neuchâtel. The brutality of the new regime was instant. The young kings, mere boys who were pawns in this great game, were executed immediately, their bodies left to rot, sparing only the infant Merovingian in a momentary lapse of mercy. Brunhilda, however, was not granted the release of a quick death. She was dragged in chains to Renève, where, before the assembled forces of a united Francia, the queen who had ruled for 50 years would face a trial that was nothing more than a grotesque piece of political theater. Standing before the tribunal, the nearly 80-year-old queen faced accusations that stretched the limits of credibility even in the brutal, violent world of Merovingian politics. Chlothar II, acting as judge, jury, and executioner, accused Brunhilda of being responsible for the deaths of 10 separate Frankish kings, a list so expansive it bordered on the absurd. He charged her with the death of her own husband, Sigebert I, who had been assassinated by Fredegund's hired killers in 575, a twisted rewriting of history. Considering Brunhilda had loved Sigebert fiercely, and his murder had been the catalyst for her lifelong quest for vengeance. Chlothar went further, blaming her for the death of his own father, Chlothar I, who had been mysteriously stabbed to death in 584, and even accused her of orchestrating the deaths of her own grandsons, Chlothar II and Chlothar II, conveniently ignoring the fact that they had destroyed each other in a fratricidal civil war that broke her heart. He claimed she was behind the death of Merovingian, the son of Chlothar, ignoring the reality that Merovingian had been her second husband and a man she had tried to save. While the murder of Bishop Desiderius was indeed her doing, a calculated political strike, it was buried under a mountain of fabricated charges, a litany of crimes, some of which occurred before she could possibly have been involved. The charges were designed to paint her not as a ruler, but as a monster, a demonic figure who had used murder and treachery to poison the royal bloodline for 5 decades. While some accusations held fragments of truth, she had indeed ordered executions, including the death of Duke Uncilen, whom she had killed under harsh interrogation. The wholesale attribution of every violent death in the kingdom to her was a calculated lie. These accusations served a clear, dark purpose. By branding her as the sole architect of the chaos that had plagued the region, Chlothar transformed his brutal treatment of an elderly captive into an act of divine justice. He positioned himself not as a usurper, but as an avenger, cleansing the land of a curse. The army, fed on this propaganda, cheered for her blood. The medieval sources reveal a deep, pervasive misogyny in this spectacle. While Merovingian kings routinely murdered brothers, nephews, and rivals without facing moral condemnation, Brunhilda's similar actions were portrayed as unnatural, a perversion of the female spirit. Her crime was not merely what she had done, but that she had dared to do it while female, wielding the mundium, the power of protection and authority, that Frankish law reserved exclusively for men. Standing before her accusers, Brunhilda offered no defense that had survived the erasure of time. Perhaps she knew that words were useless against the sword. The sentence was pronounced, and with it began 3 days that would cement her execution as one of the most brutal in recorded history. What followed was a prolonged ritual of humiliation and agony that lasted 3 full days and nights. The army that had abandoned Brunhilda at the river Ain now gathered to witness her suffering, a sea of spectators hungry for the fall of the mighty. The torture served multiple purposes, satisfying the soldiers who had feared her power for so long, demonstrating Chlothar's absolute triumph, and sending an unmistakable message to any noble who might question the new order. The historical sources are clear about the duration, though they recoil from describing the exact tortures inflicted, leaving the horror to our imagination. What we know with absolute certainty is that Brunhilda, at nearly 80 years old, endured physical torments designed to break her body and spirit piece by piece. Her bones had grown brittle with age, her flesh thin and paper-like, and her body no longer possessed the resilience of youth to withstand such abuse. Yet, the torturers were skilled artisans of pain, calibrating their methods to keep her alive and suffering for the full 3 days Chlothar had decreed, denying her the release of unconsciousness. The psychological dimension of her punishment was equally calculated and devastating. Brunhilda had spent nearly half a century as a figure of ultimate authority, commanding vast armies, appointing bishops to their sees, and determining the fates of entire kingdoms with a word. Now, she was rendered completely powerless, her royal dignity stripped away, subjected to the will of men who had once feared to even meet her gaze. The reversal was total, deliberate, and crushing. The centerpiece of her public humiliation came when she was bound to the back of a camel and paraded through the assembled army. The Liber Historiae Francorum specifically records this detail, and the choice of a camel was deeply symbolic and cruel. These exotic beasts from distant eastern lands were unfamiliar to Frankish soldiers, viewed as strange and grotesque oddities. The camel's awkward, lurching gait made Brunhilda's ride a physical ordeal, the constant jarring motion sending waves of agony through her already battered body. Mounted high on the animal's back, Brunhilda was visible to the entire encampment, a trophy on display. Thousands of eyes witnessed her degradation. As the camel was led through the ranks, the soldiers jeered and mocked her, shouting vile insults, laughing at her helplessness, and celebrating her precipitous downfall. Men who had served under commanders she appointed now felt free to express their contempt openly. Some soldiers may have thrown refuse at her. Others may have spat in her direction as she passed. A collective release of hatred against the woman who had dominated their world. The mockery was relentless, wave after wave of humiliation washing over the elderly queen. This was not spontaneous. It was orchestrated and encouraged. Chlothar needed his army to see Brunhilda not as a captured queen deserving of the respect due to her rank, but as a common criminal receiving just punishment. Every jeer, every mocking laugh reinforced a narrative that her execution was justice rather than political murder. The soldiers became participants in her destruction, complicit in the spectacle, and bound by that complicity to Chlothar's new regime. Between these degrading processions, she was kept in confinement that the sources do not detail, but we can imagine the horrific conditions. Cold autumn nights without adequate shelter, minimal food and water, her wounds left untreated and festering. Every hour that passed added to her physical deterioration. Sleep would have been impossible, both from the searing pain of her injuries and from the terrifying knowledge of what awaited her at dawn. The nights must have stretched endlessly, filled with the sounds of the camp around her, the laughter and conversations of soldiers, the normalcy of their routines, providing a stark, cruel contrast to her own impending doom. The historical sources suggest she remained conscious throughout much of this ordeal, a final cruelty that she was forced to experience and remember every moment of her degradation, unable to escape into oblivion. As the third day drew to a close, Brunhilda had survived torments that would have killed many younger prisoners. Her body was broken, her spirit tested beyond imagining. Yet she still lived, a testament to her legendary will. But Chlothar had reserved for her a final act of brutality that would ensure her death became one of the most horrifying executions in European history. On the fourth day, as the pale autumn sun rose over Renève, the torture ended and the execution began. She would be dragged to death behind a wild horse, her body destroyed by the very ground she had once ruled. This execution method, known as fatal dragging by equine force, had ancient precedents but remained shocking even in the brutal context of Merovingian justice. Brunhilda was brought before the assembled army one final time. Her body, already ravaged by 3 days of torture, was prepared for the end. According to multiple historical accounts, she was secured by her silver hair, one arm, and one leg to the tail of an unbroken horse. Some sources indicate bindings were also attached to her wrists and ankles, ensuring her entire body would suffer the tearing force. The horse itself was deliberately chosen, not a trained warrior steed that might be controlled, but a wild animal, powerful, skittish, and unpredictable. When the horse was released, it bolted immediately. The terror of confinement, the unfamiliar weight dragging behind it, and the shouts of the soldiers drove the animal into a panic gallop. Brunhilda's body was instantly pulled across the rough ground with sickening speed. The initial jolt alone would have caused tremendous damage to her already weakened frame, dislocating joints and tearing muscles, beginning the fatal trauma that would end her life. As the horse ran, her body was violently dragged over terrain studded with sharp rocks, tree roots, and uneven earth. The bindings held firm, expertly tied to ensure they would not break. This was deliberate. The executioners had crafted them specifically to ensure Brunhilda's body would remain attached for as long as possible, prolonging her agony to the very last second. The Chronicle of Fredegar notes with grim finality that her body was catastrophically damaged as the horse careened through the camp. The constant jarring and pulling began to literally cause fatal injuries throughout her body, tearing limb from limb. The execution was prolonged. The horse covered significant distance before Brunhilda's ravaged form finally ceased showing signs of life. When the horse was eventually caught and brought to a halt, what remained was barely recognizable as human. But even this was not the end. The Liber Historiae Francorum records that her final grave was fire itself. Her broken remains were gathered and burned, her body reduced to ash and scattered to the wind. This ensured no shrine could be built to her memory, no grave that might become a rallying point for her supporters. Even physical remains that might have been buried with honor were eliminated, erasing her from the earth. Brunhilda's execution marked the definitive end of the civil wars that had torn Francia apart for nearly half a century. Chlothar II became the first king to unite all the Frankish kingdoms since 561. The reunification came at the cost of extraordinary violence, and Brunhilda's broken body became the foundation upon which he built his unified realm. Knowing what you now know about Brunhilda's final days, do you believe her execution was justified punishment for her political crimes? Or was it an act of misogynistic cruelty designed to make an example of a powerful woman who refused to surrender her authority? The ruins of medieval Francia still bear witness to her life and death. Scattered across the landscape she once commanded, silent monuments to a queen who defied the world.